There are things your child should never have to carry. Things they should never have to say. But that night, my stepson said something I'd never forget. And everything unraveled from there. I wasn't planning to lose myself in someone else's son. But if you've ever been left feeling invisible in your own home, if you've ever stared at a closed door, wondering if love lives on the other side of it, tell me, what would you have done? Would you have walked away the second the line blurred? Or would you have stayed, just long enough to feel like a person again? Like this video if you've ever wanted something you weren't supposed to want. Speech balloon, drop a comment if you've ever felt like the extra in your own life. Bell and subscribe, because some stories don't go where you think they will. My name's Frances Galindo. I'm 37. I used to be a middle school teacher. Now, I'm the woman who married into someone else's story, and got a little too close to the subplot. I met Salvatore Strickland 3 years ago at a charity thing. He was tall, gorgeous, smart, the kind of man who ordered wine confidently. The kind of man who didn't just walk into a room, he owned the air in it. He was a single dad with 2 kids, Dax and Nia, and this soft sadness behind his eyes. He told me his ex-wife, Alexa, had left him for a better life in Chicago, whatever that meant. And me? I was tired of dating men who couldn't spell commitment, let alone be it. So when Salvatore looked at me like I was his second chance, I grabbed it. The wedding was quick. Intimate. Just the 4 of us in a garden behind his mother's house. Nia was 13, all braces and quiet glares. Dax was 17, tall, polite, guarded. I didn't expect to be their mom. Honestly? I didn't even expect to be liked. But I figured if I showed up, every dinner, every ride to school, every awkward silence, maybe one day, I'd earn a little space in their world. We moved into Salvatore's place. Big house. Open kitchen. Hardwood floors that creaked in all the wrong places. But it looked like a dream. The kind of place you see on Pinterest boards titled Modern Family Goals. Except dreams don't usually come with invisible ink. Because from the beginning, I felt like a guest. There were pictures of Alexa still in the hallway. Nia had her own world with her dad, private handshakes, inside jokes I didn't get. And Dax? Well, Dax barely spoke to me at all. He wasn't rude. He wasn't mean. He was distant. Like a radio station just slightly out of tune. He'd nod at dinner. Say thanks if I passed the mashed potatoes. But his eyes never really landed on me. Like I was background noise, there, but not there. Salvatore told me to give it time. They just need to adjust, he said, pouring another glass of red while half listening to his phone buzz with work alerts. But time kept passing. And Salvatore kept disappearing. First for a night, then a weekend, then a last-minute investor thing in Atlanta. I stopped asking when he'd be home. Because the answer was always the same, soon. I started reading with Nia before bed. It gave us a little ritual, something quiet we could share. Books became our bridge. She liked fantasy. I liked hearing her giggle when I did the voices wrong. But even that small piece of connection made the gaps feel bigger everywhere else. The house got quieter. Salvatore got colder. And me? I started folding laundry just to feel useful. Just to feel like I had a role. Every once in a while, I'd hear Dax's music through his bedroom wall, low, moody, always a little sad. Sometimes, he'd leave a mug in the sink and I'd wash it, just for something to do. And I'd catch myself wondering. How did I go from being someone's person, to be someone's placeholder? I didn't sign up for loneliness. But I also didn't sign up to be seen by someone who wasn't supposed to see me. Every night at 8:45, Nia would appear in the hallway, holding whatever book she was stuck on that week, her version of an invitation. That little routine? It became my anchor. We'd sit on the edge of her bed, under the glow of that star-shaped night light she refused to let go of, even at 13. I'd read with one hand and hold her cat, Pickles, with the other, badly mispronouncing fantasy names and getting dramatic with voices just to make her laugh. It was the only time in the day where I felt like I mattered. Not as a stepmom. Not as a wife. Just as someone who showed up and was seen. It didn't matter that Dax barely spoke to me. Or that Salvatore had stopped noticing when I changed my hair, or wore the blue blouse he used to love. Those 15 minutes with Nia were my reminder that maybe I wasn't completely invisible yet. But outside that bedroom door, everything else was slippin'. Our first anniversary was coming up. I planned a small dinner at home. Nothing dramatic, just candles, a lasagna, his favorite jazz playlist humming low in the background. He never showed. No text. No call. Just silence. At 10:17 p.m., I gave up and scraped the untouched plates into the trash. Then I sat in the kitchen with a glass of wine and listened to the sound of my own chewing. It was louder than I expected. The next morning, he came home in yesterday's clothes, smelling like hotel soap and saying something about a client dinner that ran long. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. Instead, I smiled and nodded and made coffee like it was just another Tuesday. Because that's what I'd learned to do, make space for him, even when he gave me nothing to fill it with. Later that night, I sat in bed with a book in my lap, pages unturned, while he lay beside me scrolling through emails, face lit up by blue light, like his real life was on that screen. I turned to him and said, "Do you remember when we used to stay up talking for hours?" He mumbled something, not quite a yes, not quite a no, and kept scrolling. No follow-up. No eye contact. Nothing. Just this quiet confirmation that whatever we were, wasn't what we used to be. And I know, couples grow apart. Life gets busy. But this felt like more than that. This felt like disappearing. Slowly. Quietly. Without even making a sound. I couldn't stop thinking about the early days, when he'd grab my hand in the middle of the grocery store just to spin me around, or kiss me in parking lots like we were still teenagers sneaking around. There was this one night. We got caught in the rain walking back from dinner, and instead of rushing for cover, he pulled me close, laughing, and said, "Let's just get soaked." We kissed under a flickering street lamp, and I swear, the whole world fell away. That man? The one who laughed in the rain and kissed like he meant it? I hadn't seen him in over a year. Now, I was married to someone who barely looked up when I walked in the room. I'd stand in the doorway, holding dinner, or news or a joke I thought he'd laugh at, and I'd watch his fingers tapping away at some report like I was a shadow behind him. And the wildest part? I started to believe I was a ghost in my own house. Even with Nia, even with bedtime stories and shared laughter. Once that door closed, the silence rushed back in like water through a cracked dam. I missed feeling needed. I missed being touched, not out of habit, but out of want. I missed being chosen. And every time I passed Dax in the hallway. Every time he looked up from his sketchbook just long enough to make eye contact. I felt this strange tug in my chest. Not love. Not desire. Not yet. But something. Something that whispered. You're not the only one in this house who feels invisible. It was a Friday night, one of the few nights Salvatore had promised he'd be home early. I cooked. Nia had helped me set the table, carefully folding the napkins the way her dad liked them. I even lit candles, hoping maybe, just maybe, we could have a real dinner. The kind where no one scrolls through a phone. The kind where we might actually look at each other. At 7:12 p.m., my phone buzzed. Sorry babe. Last-minute conference call. Eat without me. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not mad. Not shocked. Just hollow. Like I'd been stood up by someone who used to love me. Nia didn't even ask where he was. She just picked at her food, fed some of it to Pickles under the table, then went upstairs without a word. I followed her a few minutes later, book in hand, and climbed onto her bed like I always did. We read a few chapters of The Girl Who Drank the Moon, and she drifted off mid-sentence, her head slumped against my arm. I eased out slowly, tucked the blanket tighter around her shoulders, and turned off the night light. That's when I heard it. Pages turning. Soft music. A quiet hum through a cracked door just a few feet down the hallway. Dax's room. Normally, I'd tiptoe past, pretend I didn't notice. But something about that night. Maybe it was the cold lasagna still on the table. Maybe it was how quiet the house had gotten. Or maybe, it was the way I just needed to feel like I wasn't alone in it. I paused outside his door, hand hovering. Then gently knocked twice. The music stopped. "Yeah," he called out, voice low. I peeked my head in. "Just checking in," I said softly. "Couldn't sleep?" He looked up from a book resting in his lap, The Little Prince. His glasses were slipping down his nose. His hair was a mess. But his eyes. They were kind. Guarded, but kind. "Just reading," he murmured. "Helps me think." I hesitated. Then, without really thinking it through, I said, "Mind if I join for a bit?" He blinked at me, like I'd just offered something foreign. Then, after a moment, he shrugged. "Sure." I walked in slowly, careful not to step on the sketchpads littering the floor, and sat at the far edge of his bed. He shifted, offering the book. "You want to read it?" "No," I smiled. "You can keep going. I'll just listen." And so he did. His voice was calm, deliberate, like he'd read these words 100 times before. There was something soothing about it. About just being there, no expectations, no pressure, no silence to fill. A few pages in, he paused. Closed the book gently. Then, without looking at me, he said, "Do you ever wish it was just me and you?" I froze. I didn't even blink. My stomach dropped, like I'd missed a step on a staircase that wasn't there. I turned to him slowly, trying to read his expression. But he wasn't hiding. He was looking at me. Directly. Not like a teenager with a crush. Not like a boy needing comfort. It was deeper than that. Something raw. Lonely. Real. The kind of look you give someone when you know they're just as broken as you are. I didn't know what to say. I should have laughed. Should have brushed it off. Should have made a mom joke and thrown a pillow and said, "Nice try, buddy." But my voice didn't come. Because the truth was, there had been nights I thought about it too. Nights where I stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes while Salvatore laughed on the phone with someone else in the other room. Nights where I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was the only one in the house who felt like furniture. Nights I thought, what if I just had the kids? What if I didn't have to keep begging a man to notice me? What if being seen didn't have to come with begging? So when Dax asked that question, that impossible, heartbreaking question, it cracked something open. Not just in the air between us, but in me. Because I couldn't lie. Not to myself. Not anymore. And I think, he saw the truth in my silence. We didn't speak for a long moment. He picked at the corner of the book. I stared at the floor. Then, softly, I stood up and said, "Good night, Dax." He looked up slowly, nodded once. I left the room, heart thudding so hard I felt it in my throat. I didn't sleep that night. And the worst part? I didn't regret going in there. I regretted that I didn't say something. Because somewhere deep in my chest, I wasn't sure I wanted it to stop. The next morning, I couldn't see his eyes. I busied myself with pancakes, even though no one asked for them. Dax walked in, said morning like nothing had happened. Salvatore was already gone. Nia was still in bed. It was just us, in that too big kitchen, under that too bright light, pretending like the night before hadn't happened. But it had. And I felt it with every second that passed. Was it a joke? A teenager pushing a boundary just to see what would happen? Or was it something darker? A cry for attention from a boy who'd been let down by every adult in his life? Maybe I was just reading too much into it. Maybe I was the broken one. Maybe he was just repeating the same loneliness I'd been swallowing for months. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a joke. You can feel the difference between play and pain, and that boy's words weren't playful. They were honest. And that scared the hell out of me. That night, I avoided the hallway. I stayed downstairs after Nia's bedtime, half watching a rerun with the volume too low. Anything to keep myself grounded. Distracted. Normal. I told myself he'd forget. That it was a one-time thing. A moment of vulnerability, now buried under teenage indifference. But at exactly 9:03, I heard it. Footsteps. Not heavy. Not fast. Just, waiting. I peeked up. He was standing halfway down the stairs, book in hand. The Little Prince. His voice was quiet. We didn't finish. I should have said no. I should have waved him off, told him to go read on his own, told him it was late, told him anything. Instead, I nodded. And followed him up the stairs. He didn't turn on the lights. Just cracked open his door and let the lamplight spill in from the hallway. We sat on his bed again, closer this time, like the space between us had quietly given up. I didn't ask why he kept reading. He didn't ask why I stayed. And when I leaned in to see the page, my shoulder brushed his. I felt him tense. Then soften. He kept reading. His voice had a slight shake, just enough to catch my breath. And when I reached to turn the page, my fingers grazed his. I should have pulled back. Instead, I left them there. Just for a second too long. Not on purpose. Not consciously. But it happened. And he noticed. The room held its breath. It should have ended there, I would think later. Right there, that moment. That subtle touch. That quiet pause. That excuse to stand and walk away. But loneliness doesn't follow rules. It doesn't care about titles or boundaries or what you're supposed to be. It only cares that someone sees you. And in that room, with paper-thin walls and years of silence wrapped around us, I was being seen in a way I hadn't felt in forever. Then, without looking up, he said it. You're the only one who ever sees me. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just sad. And so vulnerable it cracked something deep in my chest. I didn't answer. What was there to say? That I saw him too? That I knew exactly what that kind of loneliness tasted like? That I hated myself for understanding? I stayed quiet. But I think my silence said enough. Because when he finally closed the book and looked at me, he didn't need words to know. He already knew. And that terrified me more than anything else in the world. The bedtime stories didn't stop. We never talked about them. We just kept showing up. Like if we didn't say it out loud, it couldn't become real. Every night around 9, Dax would be there. Same book. Same space between us. Only now, that space felt thinner. The touches were small. Light. A brush of the fingers when turning a page. A hand resting a little too long on a knee. A shared glance held 1 second too long. I kept telling myself it wasn't anything. That I was imagining it. That it was still innocent enough. But deep down, I knew exactly what was happening. And I didn't stop. Because in those quiet moments, wrapped in soft lamplight and unspoken ache, I felt something I hadn't in years. Wanted. And that feeling, it's dangerous when you've been starving for it. Meanwhile, Salvatore was drifting further away. We barely spoke. When we did, it was logistics, groceries, bills, appointments. He didn't touch me. Didn't ask how I was. Didn't even notice when I stopped wearing makeup or started sleeping in a different shirt every night. He was somewhere else, mentally, emotionally, maybe even physically. Then she showed up. Alexa. Out of nowhere. I just wanted to check in on the kids, she said, standing in our doorway with that too sweet smile and the kind of blouse you don't wear just to drop by. Salvatore acted surprised. But not confused. He poured her a drink like he'd been expecting her. They sat in the kitchen talking for nearly an hour while I stood at the bottom of the stairs, pretending I wasn't listening, but hearing everything. Nia was thrilled. Dax? Silent. And me? I started wondering if I'd ever actually been chosen, or just convenient. That night, when Salvatore came to bed smelling like her perfume, I rolled over and stared at the wall. I didn't ask. Because I already knew. So I did the only thing I could. I showed up for the one person who still showed up for me. At 9:11 p.m., I opened Dax's door. He was already sitting up, book in hand, pillow propped behind him like he was waiting. We didn't say much. He opened to the last page we'd read, and we continued. Word after word, page after page, sentence after sentence, until we hit the end. He closed the book gently. His thumb lingered on the spine. Then, in the softest breath, he said, "That's it." I nodded. Guess we finished it. We both just sat there. The silence felt heavy. But not awkward. It felt full. Like it was holding something we hadn't dared to touch yet. I started to stand. But before I could move, Dax reached out and took my hand. Not urgently. Not possessively. Just, sincerely. And then he kissed me. Soft. Careful. Like he was testing the shape of the air between us. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The world narrowed to just our faces, inches apart, the scent of book pages and laundry detergent wrapped around us like fog. I should have pulled away. Should have said no. Should have reminded him who I was. What I was. But I didn't. Instead, I kissed him back. Just once. But it was enough. Enough to feel my whole body light up in a way I hadn't felt since long before I became Mrs. Strickland. Enough to make me question every line I thought I would never cross. Was it a moment of weakness? Or was it the only real thing I'd felt in years? I couldn't look at him after that night. I mean, I could. But I didn't. Every time I passed Dax in the hallway, I turned my head. Every time he sat at the dinner table. Then Alexa came back. Not just for a visit this time. She started showing up more often, school drop-offs, casual check-ins, afternoons helping Nia with homework she hadn't been around in years. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Because one night, when I was folding laundry in the guest room, she stepped in, closed the door behind her, and said, "Be careful what kind of relationship you're building with my son." Just like that. Like she knew. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at her, throat dry, heart in freefall. She smiled. That tight, knowing kind of smile only women who've been cheated on and survived know how to wear. Teenage boys get confused, Francis. Especially when they live in a house where the adults are emotionally constipated. I laughed. I don't know why. Maybe because it was easier than crying. But the truth? Her words stung because they weren't entirely wrong. I had been building something. Not intentionally. Not with malice. But with loneliness. And loneliness is just as dangerous as desire. Maybe worse. I folded another towel just to have something to do with my hands. She stared at me a little longer, then walked out, leaving that quiet warning hanging in the air like smoke. But things didn't blow up until 2 days later. It was Sunday morning. Salvatore was home, shocker. He was sorting through the mail at the kitchen counter when he found it, a folded piece of notebook paper, wedged between bills. I didn't see it until it was already open in his hands. Dax's handwriting. A note I'd never seen before. I know it's wrong. But I meant it. And I'd do it again if it meant you'd feel something real. I felt my stomach drop. The air left the room. And the world just kind of paused. Salvatore turned to me, his face twisted, not in confusion, not in hurt. In rage. What the hell is this? I opened my mouth, and nothing came out. Because how do you explain something you don't fully understand yourself? Francis. Did you do something with my son? He wasn't yelling. His voice was low. Tight. Like he was clenching it between his teeth. And still. I said nothing. Not because I didn't want to defend myself. But because part of me knew, he never really saw me before this anyway. And now, finally, he was looking, not with love, not with understanding, but with disgust. I stared at the floor, hands trembling. And that's when Dax walked in. He looked at me. Then at his father. And without hesitation, he said. She didn't do anything. I kissed her. She didn't even want it. She was the only one who ever gave a damn about me, and you don't even notice when I'm in the room. Salvatore blinked. Shocked. Dax turned to me, eyes burning, and added. You don't have to say anything. I already know you cared. That's more than I can say for anyone else in this house. Then he walked out. No dramatics. No yelling. Just that heavy, irreversible shift in the ground beneath us. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't been ready to face. No matter how wrong it was. We both knew what it felt like to be invisible. And now? We weren't anymore. The house was quiet that morning. No slamming doors. No shouting. Just the sound of zippers, drawers closing, hangers clinking softly in the closet. I packed slowly. Not because I didn't know what to take, but because part of me wanted to feel every inch of the goodbye. Every forgotten scarf. Every pair of socks that no one else ever picked up off the floor. Every piece of me that had once hoped this house would be a home. Salvatore stood in the doorway while I stuffed the last blouse into my suitcase. He didn't ask me to stay. Didn't offer an apology. Didn't even ask for an explanation. Just crossed his arms, leaned against the frame, and said quietly. You're really leaving? I zipped the bag. I think we both knew I was never really here. He didn't argue. Didn't beg. Didn't even flinch when I rolled the suitcase past him and down the stairs. Nia didn't come out of her room. Maybe no one told her. Maybe she just didn't want to see me go. And Dax? He was already waiting by the front door. Hands in his pockets. Hair still wet from the shower. Eyes tired, like he hadn't slept in days. We didn't say much. What could we say? Everything between us had already been said, not in words, but in silence, in touches, in the things we didn't stop. I stood in front of him, gripping the handle of my suitcase so tightly my knuckles ached. I'm sorry, I whispered. For everything. He shook his head. You don't have to be. I meant what I said. I nodded. Blinked back whatever was trying to crawl up my throat. Then I did something small, almost nothing. I reached up, brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. A gesture that meant I see you. I always did. But I have to go. He closed his eyes when I touched him. And I knew, in that moment, that we'd carry this, whatever it was, whatever it became, forever. Because some lines, once crossed, don't disappear. They linger. Even if you leave. It started raining about 20 minutes after I left the house. No umbrella. Just my coat and the weight of everything I couldn't bring with me. I found a bench under an oak tree and sat down, letting the cold water soak through my sleeves. It felt fitting. Like the sky finally understood what I'd been carrying all along. And I thought about how easy it is to judge someone from the outside. To look at their choices, their silence, their mistakes, and forget they're still human underneath it all. I wasn't a villain. I wasn't a victim. I was just human. And being human means sometimes you love in ways that break you. Sometimes you need something so badly you forget to check the cost. And sometimes you remember too late. If you've ever been pulled towards someone you weren't supposed to love, drop a candle in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who's ever stood at the edge of a line they weren't supposed to cross. And if you've ever felt alone in a room full of people, you're not the only one.